Hey everybody, and welcome to Bible class. We're going to start in Genesis chapter 16. We are, of course, studying Genesis as the book of beginnings. And over the next few minutes, I can't possibly look at every aspect of Genesis 16 to 19, but I want to set the table for us, give us a little overview of what we're looking at, and then turn it over to your in-person class teacher. Genesis 16 verse 1 begins with a kind of jarring reminder. Abram and his wife Sarai, they are old. They have been waiting for a child, and that child has not come. Genesis 16 verse 1, now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. In fact, a decade had passed since the Lord called Abram to leave his country and go to the land that I will show you. The Lord had promised Abram, to your offspring I will give this land. But Abram and Sarai still didn't have any children. And so in Genesis 16, we read in many ways a very sad story. Sarai has convinced herself that the Lord is preventing me from having children, and she comes up with a plan to obtain children, in her own words, by giving her Egyptian servant, who was named Hagar, to Abram as a wife. And when Hagar becomes pregnant, Hagar, the servant, looks at Sarai, her mistress, as with contempt. She looks down on her, and Sarai becomes furious with Abram. Abram encourages his wife Sarai to do whatever seems good to her servant Hagar. Sarai deals harshly with Hagar, and Hagar runs away. What a mess. Hagar flees out into the wilderness, and the rest of Genesis chapter 16 tells us about an angel of the Lord finding her by a spring of water, and in fact encouraging her to return to her mistress and submit to her. But he also promises, I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. He even specifically tells Hagar she is pregnant with a son, and what to eventually name that son. You shall call his name Ishmael. Ishmael means God hears. I want you to name him Ishmael, Hagar, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. What a sad story. And 13 more years pass before, in Genesis chapter 17, the Lord appears to Abram. Read with me what he says in Genesis 17 verse 4. Behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you, and I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your offspring after you. And I will give to you and to your offspring after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. God goes on to prescribe circumcision as a sign of this covenant with Abraham and his descendants. And then he changes Sarai's name as well to Sarah. He promises Abraham a son by her, establishing his covenant with their eventual son. You're to name him Isaac. Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year. As we move into Genesis chapter 18, we read about God foretelling terrible destruction. And there's a reason. Because in the language of Genesis 18, verse 20, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very great. Who lived in that area that meant something to Abraham? Lot, his nephew, had moved into this area. Knowing that this is the territory where Lot is, Abraham is moved to ask the Lord in verse 23 of Genesis 18, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? And over the course of their conversation, the Lord agrees. Genesis 18, verse 32, if there are 10 righteous people in Sodom, I will not destroy it. But Genesis 19 paints a bleak, sad picture of wickedness. When Lot is told by two angels that the Lord is going to destroy this city, and Lot shares the news to his sons-in-law, he seems to be jesting, like he's making some sort of a joke or just telling a story. As morning dawns, Lot and his wife and their two daughters flee the city. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. They had been warned not to look back. But Lot's wife in Genesis 19:26 did look back. And she became a pillar of salt. Eventually, Lot and his two daughters, they come to hide in a cave, and they live there for a while. His two daughters get Lot drunk, and both of them become pregnant by their father. The firstborn, Genesis 19, verse 37, bears a son and calls his name Moab. He's the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. Again, what a mess. Some of Israel's most bitter rivals that we will hear off and on about throughout the Old Testament. The Ishmaelites, the Moabites, the Ammonites. Some of Israel's most bitter rivals have their beginning in foolish, poor choices that are documented right here in these 4 chapters. It's a lot to take in. We have a lot to talk about. I so appreciate you studying with me this evening. I'm going to kick it over to your in-person class teacher, but I hope you have a great rest of your class and a great rest of this week.